English for philosophy students. We are pre-recording today. We are not on live. By the time you see this, I will be in Northern Virginia at a church conference. A person named Randy Clark is giving a seminar, and I'm looking forward to it a lot. So, I am out of town, and we are pre-recording on the morning of Thursday. We will be back live next week, hopefully. Also, let me tell you what's happening with this course. Olavo is thinking about another book for us to study. When he originally chose Levis, he wanted to expose his students, you, to a certain kind of thought, a certain kind of reasoning. And so he wanted us to study Levis. And this has been a very good study. I have enjoyed it very much. And my mind has expanded. And I hope that your English has benefited a lot as well. We are going to continue with Levis through December until Christmas. And then in January, we will begin with a new book or a new class format. So we will continue English for philosophy students, and Olavo will have something new for us to do. Also, I want to let you know we are making preparation for students to come to the United States to study English in my house, and also to visit with Olavo and his family and be a part of his course here. And we had past tense, we had filled up all the possible spaces at my house. But I am renovating, I am creating new space in the house so that we can have more students come. So, if you have a visa, if you can get a visa by January, February, or March, please fill out an application if you would like to come. We are opening up new places for additional students who would like to study. We also have some other students who will join us during the day. So it will be a very good course. I am looking forward to it. So I hope you can come. And if you have a visa already, that seems to be the main problem, getting visas in time. So if you want to come, there is new space available. Now, let us read the portion that we read last week and the portion that we'll study today. Excuse me. We are on page 48. But I will begin to read on page 47, which was our passage for last week. I'm beginning with the paragraph that begins with the words, "The young captain's instant judgment." It's the first full paragraph on page 47. This is last week's reading, and then we will continue into this week's reading. The young captain's instant judgment or realization that it is his responsibility to save the young chief mate, a Conway boy who has committed homicide, from justice also has a training behind it. We may take the Conway as representing or evoking it. the training ship being, for us, the symbol that emphasizes the significance of the immediacy with which they recognize that they belong to the same spiritual world, a spiritual community, and speak the same language. But for them too, there are no rules. The reference to the Conway mustn't suggest that their training reduces to discipline and a code. The common Conway background completes the evocative definition of responsibility. It emphasizes the significance of the way in which, cowing the almost mutinous crew, he deliberately puts the ship he commands in desperate hazard and outrages the master mariner's morality in order to give the Conway boy who has killed a man the best possible chance of swimming safely to land and surviving. I think of Blake, quote, "I tell you, no virtue can exist without breaking these 10 commandments," unquote. But Conrad leaves it not for a moment in doubt that the Conway Code isn't merely something to be broken, that it isn't is necessary to the paradox, the even that presents the breaking as having an essential part in the evocation of what responsibility in its uncodifiable nature is. The Conway stands for the community, transcending statistics and social studies.
Bless you.
Excuse me. I hope I'm not getting a cold. The Conway stands for the community, collaboratively creative background. The Conway stands for the community, transcending statistics and social studies, that gives responsibility its collaboratively created background and its quality as essential to the human world. What the young captain preeminently, but with him the refugee, demonstrates is the necessity and the nature of the living principle that keeps the innumerable community of any present, the community that is exposed to social studies, alive enough to endure. That was last week. I will read this week's paragraph now. This community is figured by the merchant service, which cannot, as the young chief mate had testified in that recourse to physical measures of enforcement which turned into homicide, do without discipline and a code. It was by no chance freak that both captain and chief mate were graduates of the Conway, and the paradox entailed in their vindication of human responsibility belonged to the spiritual culture, the human world that had formed them, a culture necessary to the Conway ethos, specialized within it. The two young ship's officers, as the tale makes plain, represent a very small minority, but they are far more than being sports. Without a nuclear live presence of essential responsibility, discipline and code would be no better than mechanical habit, and the mechanical can deal only with the routine and the expected. Men, in any case, are not machines, and something in them responds to the challenge that what manifestly is a demonstration of essential human responsibility can't but be for them, and to the reminder of what is required of them by the life they focus. That both the captain and the chief mate each incurs the hostility of the rest of the ship's complement is far from disposing of the point. Okay, I want to begin with a little bit of a review of last week, some of the main themes. As I look at the paragraph we did last week, I want to bring out the theme of responsibility. Remember the table from many weeks ago. The code of law is the baseline standard codification of that which is right, proper, and good. Above that, well, beneath it is lawlessness. Above it is human responsibility. It says in the scripture, remember, you shall judge the angels. In our society, we have the code of law, and we have judges who interpret and, they interpret the law, and they see to it that the spirit of the law, the intent, the heart and soul of what is intended by the law is carried out. They are able to hear when a particular circumstance is unusual and requires an unusual approach. Only a human being can listen to a situation and judge whether an exception to the code must be made. The code is mechanical. It can only deal with the routine and the expected. But that which is unusual requires a human judge. The ability to judge apart from a code is what Levis is referring to as human responsibility, and it is part of the human world. The human world is the world of relationships that is uniquely experienced by human beings. It is not objective and scientifically verifiable. It is spiritually discerned and spiritually and psychologically interacted in. Now, another key theme in this paragraph was training. When I asked Olavo, how do you push into the human maturity that enables you to function within the realm of responsibility? He said it requires training. Now, the best training, according to Olavo, is, well, according to Levis, the training has to do with reading literature, hanging out with the great minds of history, bringing your sensibility, your emotional responsiveness to the great stories of literature. Through all this we grow. We see the great drama of human life and how the decisions play out and what the results are. And we have the ability to judge whether an outcome is good or evil, whether a law is good or evil. By reading, by considering and thinking through the great stories, we become wise. Olavo also said this growth tends to happen when we are disappointed, when the world lets us down, when we suffer, when we are misunderstood, and someone says we are guilty of a crime when really we are innocent, when the code of law disappoints us, we begin to look for something else, and we grow. Now, one more theme in this paragraph is spiritual community. And he also calls it same language. We speak the same language. We are part of a spiritual community. I want to tell you a little story from my life that will illustrate this. I meant to tell it last week and didn't find time. When I was in high school, I was 16 years old. And I went to a school with 1,000 or more students. And I had many friends. I knew a lot of people. One weekend, I went away with some other teenagers from my school. We went to a spiritual retreat. We went on retreat. To go on retreat is a religious thing. You go away to a place in the country and you live there for a few days with some people and you listen to speakers and you have time to think and pray and sing songs with guitars to God and also play games. We're teenagers. And on this retreat, all of us had a profound experience of God and of each other. And we formed a community. And at the end of the retreat, we had the opportunity to say yes to Jesus Christ and to ask Him to come into our lives and help us to be born again, help us to follow Him and to find a fellowship with God through Him. Essentially, we were becoming Christians. Many of us had a profound experience of God through Christ on this retreat. And on the last day, when we had the opportunity to commit our lives to Christ, if we committed our lives, they gave us a cross to wear. It was made of nails, like the nails that went into Jesus' wrists, large nails. It was made of nails on a leather lanyard. And everyone who had been on this retreat had the opportunity to receive this cross. And there were other students at the school who had gone on this retreat before. And they already had a cross like that. And we could see them at the school, but we didn't know what it meant. We only saw the symbol. on their cross. Well, I received that cross, and almost all of the 30 or 40 teenagers on the retreat received this cross. And then we went home to our own houses, where our parents and our brothers and sisters had never been on this retreat, and maybe were not really Christians or Catholics at all. My parents did not go to church. They were not spiritual people. So, when I came back from the retreat and came home, I was very sad because I missed the feeling I had on the retreat. It was so much love and so up. I was so happy on that retreat. And then I came home and I'm down again. And the next day I went to school. And I saw the same 1,000 students that I had been seeing every day for years. And they all seemed like strangers because they hadn't been with me when I was born again and when I changed. And they couldn't understand. And then I saw coming down the hall a person with that cross on their chest. And my heart leapt, because here was a person from my spiritual community. Here was a person who spoke the same language. Here was a person who understands. And when I saw him and our eyes locked, I think my face lit up. And I was like, hi! And we had a special phrase we would say, de colores, which meant of many colors. It was a phrase that was shared on the retreat. And also, ultrea, which meant something. I forget what ultrea means. But anyway, just to pass by that person and share a greeting and see that cross signified a bond, a family feeling. I would do anything for him, and he would do anything for me, because he is my brother and I am his sister, in a spiritual community that was created by the common experience of this retreat and of accepting Christ and changing our lives, etc. Last week, I raised a question. I asked you, I said, if one day someone is knocking on your door and you open the door and you see a crazy, upset stranger who says, the police are chasing me, I have to hide, take me in. And you look past him and you see blood dripping out of the trunk of his car. And you know there is a body in the car. What would you do? If you are a good citizen, you would call the police, turn him in, close the door. But what if, when you opened the door, it was your brother, whom you love, in trouble? What would be the right thing? Would the right thing be to close the door and call the police as though you didn't know him? Or does that feel inhuman? To me, that feels inhuman. I don't know what the right thing to do would be, but certainly not closing the door. When you are in spiritual community with someone, it is like they are your brother, and you have a responsibility to that person, which changes your duty It is a new circumstance that must be judged. When you judge what your duty is, you must judge what your responsibility to the individual is. It's a new factor. So, the responsibility goes through a long period of training. It is developed through training. And it is signified in this book by the spiritual community. And then we had that very difficult sentence that said, the significance of the way in which, cowing the almost mutinous crew, he deliberately puts the ship he commands in desperate hazard, outrages the master mariner's morality, in order to give the Conway boy who has killed a man the best possible chance of swimming safely to land and surviving. Responsibility emphasizes the significance of all that. Responsibility is the word that emphasizes the significance of all that. The significance of all that is that there is a spiritual community. The significance of all of that behavior, what it means that the captain did this, it means that a spiritual community has been formed and is in evidence, and the captain has responsibility. That is the significance of his behavior. Okay. And in the end, there's a difficult to understand paragraph. Conrad leaves it not for a moment in doubt that the Conway Code isn't merely something to be broken. That it isn't is necessary to the paradox. This is coming in the next paragraph too, and I don't think it was well explained last week. The Conway Code is part of the spiritual community that the men share. The fact that they must break it is a paradox. And that paradox shows the nature of responsibility in its uncodifiable form. That is where we ended last week. So, let's pick up with the next paragraph right now. I'm going to begin with the first sentence. This community is figured by the merchant service. Figured means symbolized. The merchant service, of which the Conway is the training ship, is the symbol of spiritual community in this book. It's very frequent in America. We have the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, the Marines, the National Guard, the Merchant Marines. All of these are different services, and the men who serve in them have great pride in their service. Well, in this case, the merchant service is the organization that the men proudly belong to. And it symbolizes for us a spiritual community. This community, figured by the merchant service, I need to get a pencil, one moment. I'll forget what I'm going to do if I can. Okay, this community is figured by the merchant service, which cannot, as the young chief maid had testified. Let's not even read this phrase. I'm going to put the sentence together, leaving out the brackets. Remember how we always used to do that, where we'd leave something out? Well, I'm going to leave out the entire phrase that has dashes, because it makes the sentence hard to understand if you don't leave it out at first. So we'll come back to it in a minute. This community is figured by the merchant service, which cannot do without discipline and a code. Okay, the community cannot do without discipline and a code. What does it mean to say something cannot do without? To do without means to not have something you think you need. For example, I think I need 3 meals a day. But if I am in a crisis, I may have to do without 3 meals a day. Maybe I will have only 1 meal or none at all. We say to a person, if a person says, I need this, and we can't get it for them, we say, well, you will just have to do without. And that means you're not getting it. You'll have to find another way. Okay. The community of the merchant service cannot do without discipline and a code. So now we are picking up that theme from the last paragraph that says the Conway Code is not something only to be broken. The Conway Code is not unimportant. The Conway Code is crucial. It is essential. It is necessary. Without discipline and the code, the merchant service could not function. It is almost central to who they are. Now, let us put back in what was in the brackets. It says, as the young chief maid had testified in that recourse to physical measures of enforcement which turned into homicide. Okay, first off, understand that this entire phrase is modifying and justifying the main sentence. The main sentence is the community merchant service You know, it would have been possible for me to save space and write less by saying the community needs a code. That is the simplest way to write the sentence. But when we say do without, it emphasizes the fundamental nature of the need. To do without presents a hardship that cannot be sustained forever. So I wanted to continue to write can't do without, so you will get used to that phrase, which is kind of an important phrase in English. They'll have to do without. It's deprivation. Okay. the community can't do without. That means it is not possible to do without. If I say, I need to breathe, and someone says, you have to do without breathing, I say, I can't do without breathing. The community can't dispense with their code. So this is an emphasis. We are getting ready to look at a paradox. A paradox. Paradox is two things which are mutually exclusive, but are both true. Code is essential to the community. Captain. No, we'll say it this way. Well, we'll say that. Captain had to break the code in order to be true to the community. This paradox shows us the essential nature of human responsibility. And this is why Levis has chosen The Secret Sharer, Conrad's story, to illustrate his point about the living principle. Okay, let's continue reading. Let's see. Okay, so we're looking at the phrase in brackets that gives more information concerning this skeleton of the sentence. I'll read this part and then I'll add the thing. This community can't do without a code, as the young chief mate had testified, in that recourse to physical measures of enforcement which turned into homicide. Okay. As the young chief mate had testified means the young chief mate knew this and said so. Said that as much. Testified is to give evidence to the effect that, excuse me, I have something in my eye. Okay. He testified, which means like to give evidence in court, but there was no court. He testified that the community can't do without a code and that he agreed with the code. In that recourse to physical measures of enforcement, which turned into homicide. Now, I believe what this is saying is that when the young chief mate killed the man, he was in the process of doing his duty. Apparently, I don't know the story, but apparently the young chief mate was attempting to enforce the code physically when he accidentally killed the person he was attempting to restrain. Apparently it was like a police action where the policeman is trying to enforce the law and ends up killing the criminal. And when that happens, the policeman has to go on trial to see if he used excessive force, to see if he broke the law himself. I think that is the situation. But for our purposes, this phrase is merely telling us that the young chief mate agrees that the community requires a code. Okay? The community requires a code, and the young chief mate knows it and agrees with the fact that the community requires a code. That is what this means. So I'll read it again. This community is figured by the merchant service, which cannot, as the young chief mate had testified in that recourse to physical measures of enforcement, which turned into homicide, do without discipline and a code. Going on. It was by no chance freak that both captain and chief mate were graduates of the Conway, and the paradox entailed in their vindication of human responsibility belonged to the spiritual culture, the human world, that had formed them, a culture necessary to the Conway ethos specialized within it. Again, a very long sentence. Take it apart bit by bit. It was by no chance freak that both the captain and chief mate were graduates of the Conway. Freak. When we say something is a freak of nature, we mean that it is something unexpected. It is a surprise. If it snows in the summer, that is a freak. If someone gets run over by their own car as they walk behind it, that would be a freak accident. If your house blows up for no reason, you would say it was a freak. Okay, so something which has no cause, apparently no cause, is a freak. It's saying here, it was by no chance freak that both captain and chief mate were graduates of the Conway. In the ethos of this book, The Secret Sharer, according to Levis, Conway is trying to show us this sense of spiritual community. And it is by design that he made sure that both of these characters were representatives of the same spiritual community. It was not just some unimportant detail, some accident, some random aspect to the story that didn't matter. It was central to the design. So, it was no chance freak that both captain and chief mate were graduates of the Conway. And the paradox entailed in their vindication of human responsibility belonged to the spiritual culture. So, the paradox is this: entailed in their vindication of human responsibility. When you vindicate something, you show that it was right, it was proper. what Levis is saying is that their actions in saving the young officer, those actions were right. And the responsibility that they showed in doing this was right. So, the paradox is entailed in the fact that they broke the code and yet they did right. They broke the code and yet they did right. That is a paradox. And it is entailed in their actions which vindicate human responsibility, showing forth that human responsibility is right and is not bound by code. Okay, so the paradox belonged to the spiritual culture. Okay, now, there would be no paradox in the legal culture of the merchant marines. Legally, the code tells you what to do, and if you break it, you are guilty. No paradox involved. In the legal culture of the merchant service, that captain would be liable to court-martial or to punishment if his actions became known. There is no paradox. He was wrong. He broke the law. He failed to return the prisoner to the ship. He endangered his ship in order to commit a crime. No paradox. He was wrong. The paradox belongs to the spiritual culture, the culture that conveys responsibility on the captain for the ship's mate. That's where the paradox is. And in the spiritual culture, he was right. Okay? So, it was by no chance freak that both the captain and chief mate were graduates of the Conway. Because if they weren't, there would be no responsibility between them. And the paradox entailed in their vindication of human responsibility belonged to the spiritual culture, the human world that had formed them. A culture necessary to the Conway ethos, specialized within it. Okay, the Conway ethos is a specialty, a subset within a spiritual culture of the merchant service. So, the merchant service has a legal code, which is not part of the spiritual community. Then it has a spiritual community. Rah, rah, we're members of the merchant service. Just like someone might say, I'm a Marine. I'm in the Army. I'm in the Air Force. I'm in the Navy. There's a spiritual culture. And then within that, there is the culture of the Conway, the training ship, which forged these two men together in a closer way, kind of like the retreat that I went on, that brought me into a community with a small group of students who were a subset of my school. Moving on. The two young ship's officers, as the tale makes plain, represent a very small minority, but they are far from being sports. A sport is a offspring, a child, an individual of a species, which displays characteristics which are common in the species, but are not present in their own parents, in their own genetic line. Another word for sport is a throwback. So, if you have black hair and brown eyes and dark skin, and your wife has black hair, brown eyes, and dark skin, and your family all have black hair and brown eyes and dark skin, and then one day your wife gives birth to a baby that has blonde hair and blue eyes, the baby may be a sport. Assuming she really is your child, it is possible for you to have a blonde, blue-eyed child. If there was someone anywhere in your history that had blonde hair and blue eyes, but for some reason the genes were suppressed, okay, that individual would be a sport. Someone who is very rare, almost unheard of. That's a sport. Not impossible, not a miracle, but very rare. Maybe the result of a mutation, something wrong genetically, suppressing the normal characteristic. That's a sport. So it says, the two young ship's officers, as the tale makes plain. So the tale, the story, clarifies for us that these officers represent a very small minority. Like the number of students who went on retreat, 30 or 40 students of 1,000. Okay. They are a small minority, but they are far from being sports. Far from it means they're not close at all to being very rare. They are not abnormal. They are a minority, not a freak. Okay, in other words, there are plenty of people like them, just not the majority. Okay, so they are not a tiny minority of one. Rather, they are a healthy minority of people at the center of the organization. Okay. Represent a very small minority, but they are far from being sports. Now, I'm wondering, if you are wondering, what characteristics make them a minority? I believe the characteristic is the characteristic of responsibility. Most of the sailors on the ship would want the young ship's mate just simply to be turned in. Follow the code. They did not have the Conway spiritual community causing them to want to save this man. But the captain and the chief mate both had the Conway background and were part of the small community. And there were others, but most of the people around did not share this community. Okay. The two young ship's officers, the tale may explain, represent a very small minority, but they are far from being sports. Without a nuclear, live presence of essential responsibility, discipline and code would be no better than mechanical habit. And the mechanical can deal only with the routine and be expected. In America, when you need an exception to be made for you to the rule, you go to a high authority. For example, if I do not pay my electricity bill, usually they will turn off the power. But what if something happened to the bill. For example, what if the electric company made a mistake and they erased my name from their computer and never sent me any bills? Maybe it is not my fault that I didn't pay. So, I go to the office and I say, "Why have you turned off my electricity?" And the girl at the counter, who is paid a small amount of money, and she is young, and she is not well educated. She's someone who answers phones. She says, "Your bill was past due. We turned off the electricity according to your contract." And I say to her, "But there was no bill." And she says, "Your bill was past due, so we turn off the electricity in response to your contract." And I say, "My contract states that you will send me a bill, and you did not." And she says, "When the bill is past due, we turn off the electricity in response to your contract. Next, please." She doesn't want to speak to me. So I say to her, "Let me speak to your boss." And she says, "Management, please come to the counter. Customer inquiry." And the boss comes. And he says to me, "What can I do for you, Mrs. Noyes?" And I say, "I never received a bill and my electricity is off." And he looks at it and says, "Oh my goodness, we have made a mistake. I'm very sorry. We will turn back on your power. Here's your bill, and you pay it today. We're turning back on your power." Whatever. He is the nuclear live presence of essential responsibility. So, at the low level, we have people who will dispense the code in a routine way. But beyond that person, there must be a person you can get to who can look at your case and judge what is right in your case. That is what they're talking about. He is saying that the captain and the chief mate are a small minority in that they are people who can look at the circumstance and make an exception to the rule in a way which is appropriate, not lawless. They are the essential core of responsibility. Okay, without, I'm reading now, a nuclear live presence. Nuclear suggests in the center. It also, like the nucleus of a cell, it also suggests the brains. The DNA is contained in the nucleus. The orders are given to all of the functions of the cell from the nucleus. This is the brain center of a community. Without a nuclear live presence of essential responsibility, discipline and code would be no better than mechanical habit. So in the merchant service, they have a code, and they must have a code, and that code takes care of 99 routine cases out of 100. But that 100th case requires a person to judge. So without that person, the code is simply mechanical habit. And the mechanical can deal only with the routine and the expected. Men, in any case, are not machines. and something in them responds to the challenge that what manifestly is a demonstration of essential human responsibility can't but be for them. Okay, this contains some interesting constructions. The first part is clear. Men, in any case, are not machines. In any case is kind of like furthermore. It's just, and so on. It's just a little phrase saying, in any situation you can think of, a man is not a machine. Okay, so men are not machines. And something in them, something in the essential nature of humanity, responds to the challenge that, now we have a phrase, what manifestly is a demonstration of human responsibility. That whole phrase means it refers to the situation that the captain finds himself in, where he sees a brother in need and judges that he must help him, even though it involves breaking the code. This situation is an example of essential human responsibility. And a human being seeing it responds with their heart to the challenge of this situation. We want to look at it and say, what would be right? We want to employ our God-given moral faculty, our essential nature, which is to judge the angels. We want to use this power to judge rightly in this situation. It is a challenge, and we want to exercise responsibility because that's who we were made to be by God. When we say can't but be for them, we see the situation and we see the situation and we say, that is for me. It must be. If I have a son at home who is learning to play guitar, and I bring home a brand new guitar and he sees it, he says, that can't but be for me. It must be for me. Can't but means must. It must be mine. It can't not be mine. Double negative. There is no way that that thing is not for me. Can't but is a double negative, meaning a positive. It's a strong positive. And it's saying that men, something in man responds to the challenge that what manifestly is a demonstration of essential human responsibility can't but be for them. It must be for them. And to the reminder of what is required of them by the life they focus. They respond to it because it reminds them of who they are created to be. They are created to judge the angels. They are created to focus the light of God in an individual personality and shine it out and be a judge. We are born to exercise moral responsibility and to get it right. And when we see the opportunity, we long for it. As a hungry man longs for meat, not just milk. Okay? That both the captain and the chief mate each incurs the hostility of the rest of the ship's complement is far from disposing of the point. Disposing of the point means to nullify or to invalidate. So one might say, well, everybody was against them. They must be wrong. Levis is saying no. The fact that everyone was against them does not mean they were wrong in their moral judgment, because it's in the nature of human responsibility to be uncodifiable and to be personally judged. And very frequently, the large majority of people will think you are wrong. It's in the nature of the beast. It's in the nature of human responsibility. So I'm going to reread the paragraph to see if everything is adequate. We cannot take questions this week unless you email them. And I'll give you my email address again, because there was one student who wanted to come and take my English course, and she only had Sylvia's address, and she was not able to contact me. And I don't want that to happen. I want you to be able to contact me. So I'll give that to you in a moment. But let me reread this paragraph to see if anything strikes me, and then we will end the class for this week. Page 48. This community is figured by the merchant service, which cannot, as the young chief mate had testified in that recourse to physical measures of enforcement which turned into homicide, do without a discipline and a code. It was by no chance freak that both the captain and the chief mate were graduates of the Conway, and the paradox entailed in their vindication of human responsibility belonged to the spiritual culture, the human world, that had formed them, a culture necessary to the Conway ethos, specialized within it. The two young ship's officers, as the tale makes plain, represent a very small minority, but they are far from being sports. Without a nuclear live presence of essential responsibility, discipline and code would be no better than mechanical habit, and the mechanical can deal only with the routine and the expected. Men, in any case, are not machines, and something in them responds to the challenge that what manifestly is a demonstration of essential human responsibility can't but be for them, and to the reminder of what is required of them by the life they focus. That both the captain and the chief mate each incurs the hostility of the rest of the ship's complement is far from disposing of the point. Okay, if you have any questions about this, please email me. Here is my email. Margarita .noyes at gmail.com. If you have to write in Portuguese, it's okay. Someone can translate for me. Also, there is a Google translator that works pretty well. So if you want to try running your email through the Google translator, some people have done that, and it seems to work fairly well. So I'll see you next week. Have a good week.